IVM.
The pushback of the entitled, of the privileged, the violence is visible or invisible, but it's there. Rupen Bajaj Deol, a woman, not a grassroots worker, an IAS officer, was at an after-work party in 1988 when her bum was battered by a senior police officer in a room full of people, despite her objections. Welcome to the show, The Longest Constitution, where we are looking at conflict at the workplace, the right against discrimination, and where laws can protect and where they just fail. In the last episode, we saw the making of the Vishakha Guidelines, India's first guidelines, but not law, on sexual harassment, which identified work as a space, but not just the office and official space. It followed Bhavri Devi's gang rape in a village as a consequence of her work for the government, and compelled the government to take responsibility for the safety of women at work. Work, it is as much as the office or the lift or the Uber or the metro one gets into to get to it. And yet, identifying a crime necessarily doesn't make it go away. And the Vishakha Guidelines identify that spaces are unequal for women. And come to think of it, gender is a relatively easier way to classify citizens. But how do we recognize others, unequally placed in invisible ways? While our constitution speaks firmly in favor of affirmative action for certain groups of people like women and children in Article 15 Part 3, Article 15 Part 4 talks about a large group of people, socially and educationally backward classes, not castes. And using caste to identify people was struck down in the Balaji versus Mysore case in 1963, which we've done previously. And with that, we start the long journey to identify the backward classes. Now, this was done for the first time by the Kalielka Commission set up by the first elected government of independent India in 1953. And this commission did extensive work to identify the backward. They interviewed over 5,000 people, they issued hundreds of questionnaires, and they found caste to be a dominant factor in backwardness. And when asked what the socially and educationally backward classes wanted, here's the answer they got. Better jobs, government jobs, education, stability, respect, dignity. The Kalielka Commission recommended 70% reservations in technical and professional institutions and up to 40% in government jobs. But a day before it was presented in Parliament, Kalielka himself distanced himself from the commission. It wasn't even discussed. And have a look at the links below for more reading material on this. And the report died a death. So India's first Backward Classes Commission report was rejected because it placed too much of an emphasis on caste. Not because the government was not interested in social equality, of course it was, but they felt that identifying caste as a sole criteria would not help the objective. So in 1961, the central government told the state governments, you go ahead and make your lists, but don't make caste the only criteria. But before they did that, they also mentioned the E word, efficiency. And this is what Gobit Ballabh Pant said in Parliament. If we go in for communal and caste-based reservations, we swamp the bright and able people and remain second and third-rate people. Let us help the backward classes, but never at the cost of efficiency. Bright and able versus second and third-rate? And who are we anyway? What makes us? What unmakes us? And what is this word efficiency? What does it justify and what doesn't it justify? And with that, we return to Rupen Bajaj Deol, who was groped by KPS Gill, a much decorated, celebrated IPS officer, national hero who stamped out terrorism in Punjab efficiently. Blah, blah, blah. Whatever, man. He pawed a woman, period. And that's what a hostile environment is. So what is a safe space? What is it? Where is it? Is it a closed, bounded room with locks? Or is it the big, wide world? And while our laws abound, Rupen Bajaj Deol, who was humiliated in a room full of well-dressed and powerful people, filed a case under Section 354 and 509 of the Indian Penal Code. So what is Section 509? Section 509 deals with words, gestures, or actions intended to insult the modesty of a woman. And Section 354 that deals with assault or criminal force, again, with the intention of outraging the modesty of a woman. And both of these, as you can see, work on the invisible as well as the visible. Intentions aren't seen, they are felt. And when Rupen Deol filed her case, it was amidst massive opposition. Now, here's what a newspaper report had to say about it. It makes the law of the land look grotesque, odd, and incongruous that a man who served the country by ridding a state of the dread and oppression of terrorism should have to spend time in jail for a minute's exuberance provoked by the charms of an attractive working woman. So attractive, charming working women, watch out, because accomplished men have a right to your bum and your silence. In the lower court, Deol's case was dismissed under Section 95 of the IPC. And what is this section? It talks about an act causing slight harm. So what is Section 95 of the IPC? It talks about an act causing slight harm. Any harm that is so slight that no person of ordinary sense and temper would complain of such harm. Oh, your bum was pinched? That's it? And that a safe space to work in has nothing to do with ability, but really is about having a prejudiced world. And with that, we get back to the Backward Classes Commission. Now, the Constitution itself uses the word backward classes differently in different places. So, Article 15, Part 4 uses the term socially and educationally backward classes, while Article 16, which discusses employment, merely talks about backward classes. Plus, to complicate matters, unlike the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, identifying the backward is a task for both the state and the center to do. The Constitution empowers the states to draw up and devise their own list of backward classes, which is what they did. But the union government did not in fact do this. And we are leading up to that, the very important Indira Sahni judgment. So the issue sat on the back burner for a couple of decades. And all this while, the governments of the southern states were in fact far more active in affirmative action for the backward classes. So Mark Gallagher notes the northern states, UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, were far more conservative. They did not draw up a list till the 1970s and 80s. But what did the union government do in this time? In 1978, the center set up the second Backward Classes Commission. And unlike the Kalielka Commission, this had no upper caste members, only OBCs. And this was the Mandal Commission, headed by Bhindeshwari Prasad Mandal. And this commission said quite clearly that caste is also a class and that caste is a major determinant of inequality. But apart from caste, the commission also listed 11 other indicators of inequality. But most importantly, the commission recommended reservations for the OBCs up to 27% following the Balaji verdict. And with that, we return and end the triumphant but long and tiring struggle of Rupen in the Supreme Court in 1995, and this is before the Vishaka guidelines, by the way. Gill's conviction was upheld. He was sentenced to 3 months of jail, which was later converted to 3 years of probation. But what's the most important thing was that this was the first conviction from 1860 on the basis of these 2 sections of 509 and 354. And it is the body which is the site of humiliation, violence, and protest. In the next episode, we will look at the consequences of implementing the Mandal Commission, a telling tale of the cost and the stakes in sharing and redistributing what matters so much, what changes everything. And education, a degree, a job. Did you like the show? मुझे लगा कि आपको अच्छा लगा. Share it with your colleagues and bosses and friends and juniors and seniors. Till next time, this is me, Priya Mirza, signing out.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Cyrus Says, it's all about food. Cyrus is in conversation with Vikas Khanna, chef, restaurateur, author and judge on MasterChef India. They discuss Vikas's new book, Barkat. On misconduct, Raghavi and Nisha throw it back to all the female criminals from season 1 of the show. On The Habit Coach with Ashton Doctor, philosopher and guru Gautam Jain shares some actionable habits to strengthen our minds. On The Longest Constitution, Priya explains how India's first guidelines of sexual harassment at the workplace came to be. And on Audio Gyan, editor Divya Jyoti Sarma walks Kedar through the journey of publishing a poetry book. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. We'd also really appreciate any ratings or reviews you can give us on any of the platforms that we're listening on, whether it's Apple Podcast, Spotify, or IVM Podcast app. Wherever you're listening, do let us know that you are listening. I'd also like to remind you all that we have a number of YouTube channels where a number of shows are available. You can go to ivmpodcast.com/YouTube to check out what channels we have. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, Cred, Bank of Baroda, CoinSwitch, Kuber, and Intel. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Given the unprecedented times our nation is going through, where positive is now a dreaded word, Smile India gets you delightful news from across the country about people and places that continue to spread the much-needed hope and positive vibes. I am Shifa Maitra, and you can hear Smile India with me every Thursday on the IVM app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Oh, and did I tell you Smile India is available in both English and Hindi.